Tonight, the vengeance of Mrs. Roy Moore.
Let me set the record straight.
Grad students get screwed by the tax bill. And London Parliament is falling down. Doctors have found dozens of parasites, including one 10 inches long, in the North Korean soldier who defected across the border on Monday.
저도 외과의사 생활 시작한 지가 20년이 훨씬 넘는데 이런 거는 정말 교과서적으로나 볼 수 있었고.
The man is now in stable condition after he was shot multiple times by North Korean troops. Experts say the parasites and corn kernels found in the soldier's stomach offer a window into the extremely poor hermit kingdom and illustrate the effects of food shortages and a lack of hygiene. Robert Mugabe attended a graduation ceremony in Harare today, his first public appearance since Zimbabwe's military took over and placed the president under house arrest earlier this week. The apparent coup seemed to be a way to prevent Mugabe's wife, Grace, from taking power. She wasn't at the graduation. Hours later, Mugabe's own party, ZANU-PF, demanded the president and first lady's resignations, and the head of Zimbabwe's influential veterans group has called for demonstrations against Mugabe tomorrow. The Federal Communications Commission voted yesterday to start making cuts to the Lifeline program that provides lower-income Americans with discounted phone and internet service. The 3-2 vote split along party lines. It'll limit subsidies for people living on tribal lands almost immediately. And one Democratic commissioner warned that more than 70% of the program's wireless users would be in danger of losing access to their current carriers and plans. Former Caracas Mayor Antonio Ledesma, an outspoken critic of President Nicolas Maduro, escaped to Colombia today. Ledesma was arrested in 2015 after leading anti-government protests and has been living under house arrest.
Fue una travesía, peliculesca. Estamos hablando de pasar más de 29 puestos entre guardias nacionales y policías del gobierno. Pero Dios es muy grande.
Ledesma pledged to continue fighting for his country. Donald Trump attacked Democratic Senator Al Franken on Twitter last night after a woman accused Franken of groping and forcibly kissing her. But the president is staying silent on the mounting sexual assault allegations against Roy Moore, the Alabama Republican candidate for Senate. One reason why? If Trump weighs in on Moore, it would inevitably draw comparisons to the assault allegations raised against the president during his own campaign. Trump weathered that storm, and now Roy Moore is fighting to do the same.
It's about as crazy as it looks from afar down here in Alabama. Half of the reporters in Washington have descended on the state to cover the Senate race.
Do you have a question about an issue? All right, well, we appreciate you staying and coming, and I'm glad you got more church than you've probably had in the last 10 years.
And even though multiple women have accused Roy Moore of a range of sexual misconduct, this morning here in Montgomery, more than twice as many women lined up on the steps of the state capitol with Moore's wife to vouch for his character.
He repeatedly has stood in the breach to defend others, and I know of no one else who has constantly risked it all for what is right. I dare say that there has not been a politician as bold, determined, and courageous in fighting for the cause of liberty and our rights since the times of John Quincy Adams.
If Moore makes it out of this race on top, and honestly, even if he loses, the strategy his campaign's been using to deflect attention from these allegations could be copied by any controversial candidate running this cycle. Step one, frame all attacks against Roy Moore in terms of us versus them.
To the people of Alabama, thank you for being smarter than they think you are. They will call you names. They will say all manner of evil against you. And I would say, consider the source.
This takes on a special context in the South, where there's been frustration since the Civil War, with what a lot of people down here still see as Northerners dropping in, uninvited, to impose their beliefs and take away Southerners' rights. Take a look at this 1964 letter from George Wallace, Alabama's pro-segregationist former governor, accusing outsiders of causing racial tension in the state. He said, "We have never had a problem here in the South except in a very few isolated instances, and these have been the result of outside agitators." And that context is part of what makes step 2, blame the media, so potent in this race. Listen to how Ann Eubank, a grassroots conservative activist, dismissed the allegations.
He's been tried and convicted by the mainstream media in the court of public opinion on just allegations. And the court of law is the proper place for these allegations to have gone, not to the media.
Step 3 is to gaslight, raise questions about every aspect of the allegations possible.
Is there anybody that has a question about anything other than the baseless allegations based on the fact that we know that they've got this so-called evidence they won't release? And they say even if it's fraudulent, that won't count because, again, it's about politics. And no one had a question. And you know who's being robbed? You know what election's being stolen from the people of Alabama?
The irony is, this is a roadmap first used by Donald Trump. And it's the one keeping a candidate that's a huge headache for the GOP still in the race. It worked for Trump. It could work for Roy Moore. And it might work for any number of conservative candidates that are still to run this cycle. That means this particular headache could be the start of a major migraine for the GOP.
If the GOP's new tax plan becomes law, there'll be plenty of big winners, including large corporations and the heirs to wealthy estates. But there'll also be quite a few losers. And among that group, oddly, will be graduate students. Under the GOP bill, they'd be expected to pay taxes on the tuition waivers they get from grad schools. For many, that'll make school hopelessly expensive.
My name is Ian Bradley Perrin. I'm a third-year PhD student. I'm at Columbia University. My program is in socio-medical sciences and history, which is the history of public health. I'll probably graduate in 2020, 2021, 2022. It's hard to say. My rent is $650 a month. I live in Brooklyn because I couldn't afford to live in student housing. You know, being a grad student is not a glamorous experience. Generally, I work 2 jobs simultaneously in order to, pay my bills. For one of my jobs, I make $20 an hour. For another job, I make $27 an hour. So monthly, my Columbia pay is $1,500. My MTA pass is $121. My cell phone is $85. My rent is $650. My credit card is $80. My lines of credit are $200. My food is about $300 or $400. And at the end of the month, that leaves me with $65 a month. That Ivy League life, right? So if the tax plan passes, it's almost inconceivable how much more of a tax burden I will have. I will be paying tax on the $56,000 of tuition remission that my school currently awards me. So I would be taxed as though I was making $75,000 to $80,000 a year, as opposed to $25,000 a year. I make $850, so $200 a month in tax. I mean, it would basically increase the amount of tax being withheld by $400 per paycheck. So $400 out of $850. Like, that's half of my income. What a fucking joke. I mean, I've described it to other people as being like a straw that will literally break the back of higher education. It's, graduate students will drop like flies.
I provide care for the elderly in their home. All right. I do everything from checking your mail to feeding your dog, feeding your cat, getting you dressed, getting you showered. And you said you had pizza for dinner, right? Uh-huh. Preparing your breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Whatever you ask is pretty much what I could probably do.
Taking care of old people isn't glamorous, but it's one of the fastest growing jobs in the United States, where the population is aging and young people don't want to or can't afford to look after their parents.
Okay, have a good night. All right, bye.
The problem is it's still almost impossible to make a decent living doing this work. In Georgia, home healthcare workers like Jasmine Okaheri are the largest group of domestic workers, but they only make, on average, about $21,000 a year.
What you're getting paid, that's probably only enough to pay your rent. You still have your other utility bills, you have to get food in your house, so we're still barely making ends meet.
Jasmine doesn't have health or retirement benefits, or get vacation or sick days, and home care workers are handicapped in any effort to fight for better workplace conditions. The 1935 National Labor Relations Act, which allows workers to collectively bargain, specifically excludes domestic workers. A handful of states have found workarounds, but in the vast majority of the country, domestic workers still don't have the legal right to unionize. Until earlier this year, Jasmine thought there was no way to fight the system.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jasmine Okaheri. I am a new member. I just joined, I believe, February of this year.
Jasmine is now a member of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, an advocacy group that's trying to fill the void by organizing workers to stand up for themselves. 2 years ago, they helped secure workers access to overtime pay and the federal minimum wage. Tamika Middleton is the group's only full-time staff member in Atlanta.
Welcome to our first organizing intensive.
Do you think of yourselves as a union of sorts?
Yes, I would say we are doing that similar work, but we don't have the ability to develop a collective bargaining agreement. We don't have the same access to employers that a union might have. So we're trying to figure that out and trying to play that role in a state that is very difficult to move a lot of labor-friendly things, worker-friendly pieces of legislation.
On the most fundamental level, getting things moving means gathering as many domestic workers as possible. And that, as it turns out, is hard.
Domestic work differs so much from the traditional labor force in that there's not a work site that you can go to and meet many workers. You have to figure out how to find those people.
How do you find them if they're hidden?
We go to a neighborhood and knock doors. Are you a domestic worker? Do you know a domestic worker? And then we just canvass neighborhoods. So we will go and give out flyers to everyone, tell everyone about the work that we're doing.
Does it make your work difficult that all these people don't necessarily want to talk to you or to anybody?
Definitely. Often we'll get people who are not responsive because they're anxious or they're nervous about doing anything that might make them lose their job or might offend their employer. And so we are always trying to tread really carefully. But what we want them to do is to know that they have access to a network so that they're at least being treated fairly in their jobs.
So far, they've only managed to recruit about 400 domestic workers, or less than 1% of all those in the state. But their focus is on gaining influence over the long term.
What the domestic workers face is kind of a triple whammy, as African American, as women, and as working class people.
Georgia Senator Vincent Fort is one of the few legislators fighting for domestic workers. Earlier this year, he introduced a bill that would not only raise the minimum wage in Georgia from $5.15 to $15 an hour, but would explicitly include domestic workers for the first time.
The domestic worker movement over the years has had an even more difficult fight to fight than wage workers that have been included under minimum wage laws.
If someone came to you and said, you can have the $15 minimum wage increase, but we can't include domestic workers.
I tell them to go to hell. I could not morally, in good conscience, allow a bill to be under my name without domestic workers in it.
Given the political climate in Georgia, one of the least labor-friendly states in the country, Fort's bill is a long shot. It's also opposed by most of the businesses that actually employ domestic workers. The workers aren't paid by the clients they take care of. They're paid by agencies, essentially matchmaking services that pair them together.
There are over 1,000 home care agencies in Atlanta, and all of them are very competitive as far as what they charge.
Agencies charge patients upwards of $20 an hour, but only pay workers about half that. They say very little of that difference is profit. Most of it goes towards taxes, insurance, and administrative costs.
What would it mean for the industry if a bill like the one that proposes a $15 minimum wage passes?
Agencies would have to raise their rate to stay in business. The alternative of simply paying them more per hour sounds great, except that the family is the one that has to pay it. And so the number of families who can afford to absorb that is a fairly small number. I know, and I have been around a lot, hundreds of home care workers. Yes, all of them would certainly be glad to make more money, but I don't hear a systemic complaint that they're not making enough money.
Everybody who's on board for $15 as a base wage for domestic workers in Georgia, let me see you raise your hand. Yes.
Tamika and the NDWA have heard the exact opposite from the workers they're in contact with. And they're convinced those they haven't spoken with likely feel the same. They just need to keep finding and organizing them.
I think we have some work to do. We have a lot of work to do.
When you say you have a lot of work to do, you mean like it's going to take months, it's going to take years? I mean, how far away?
The entire journey that we're on is definitely like a multi-year journey.
The crumbling home of both houses of parliament needs urgent repairs that will cost some $4.5 billion and take at least 6 years. And that's only if lawmakers vote in favor of moving everybody out during the renovation. Some members of parliament insist they should stay in their historic office, with work carrying on around them, which would cost $7 billion and take as many as 32 years. A debate on the matter is scheduled for December. Meanwhile, the asbestos-ridden Victorian relic they're debating the matter in is falling apart faster than repairs can be made.
The Palace of Westminster has been here for 150 years, and it's really the symbol of the United Kingdom. It's on every single tourist postcard. Every single feature inside is beautiful, and it really is, of course, an historic place to work. And of course, that's why 1 million people visit it every year. If it was an office block, you wouldn't have 1 million people visiting it every year.
We're very conscious of the fact that this is one of the most important, most recognised buildings in the world. When you watch a Hollywood movie, they want to establish that the action's moved to London, you get a shot of Big Ben. You know, that's everybody understands that this building is a symbol of Britain.
The repairs are so enormous and are going to take so long. Actually, working in the building will be extremely difficult. There will be noise and disturbance. So I think all of us moving out is not only the most practical, it's also the fastest way to get it fixed.
I'll show you some of the areas that we've got down here. So there's 117 plant rooms down in the basement of the Palace of Westminster. This particular one does heating for this end of the building, and you can feel the steam coming out. The problem we've got with lots of the old steam systems is we're still suffering leaks. And every single one of these plant rooms needs to be replaced.
So the water damage is up there. I think this is due to a leaking gully above. All the rainwater goods, all the gutters and drain pipes and downpipes in this building are made of cast iron. They date from the 1850s and they all need to be renewed. It has these frescoes which represent scenes from the canon of English literature. You've got a scene from Shakespeare's King Lear here. When you think about the serious mechanical and electrical challenges that we have with the plant in the basement and things like that, all these statues will have to be boxed up. All the frescoes, panels, all the carving, all the ornate fireplace, all these things will have to be protected while we do the heavy work and then reinstated and renovated.
This is the current phone system, and our digital services providers don't want to be dealing with this stuff anymore. To repair this is an absolute nightmare, even to understand where it's going, where it's serving. I mean, every single pipe and wire you see here at the moment, this is the biggest fire risk of the palace. And we're not able to remove this because we haven't been able to replace it yet. So we have a really heavily managed approach to fire at the moment. I mean, we've got 24/7 fire crews that walk through here on a daily basis to try and manage the fire risk of the palace.
It is an old building, but I don't think it's in as bad as disrepair as people make out. We would argue that actually if you move MPs out for up to 12 years, then you're completely in the hands of so-called experts. And there's a fear amongst some colleagues that if we move out, we may never move back.
If people feel they don't want to move, I think they should be just picked up and moved and thrown out in the street. We can't allow some people to stay in, but most of us leave. It's just not a practical option. Personally, I would build a new building somewhere else. Keep this as a relic. Keep it as something very special that represented a past time, but it is not fit for purpose anymore.
We'll see how the House votes. I mean, it may be that no option will be accepted. That is quite possible. The amendment could be voted down, the main motion could be voted down. We have no idea what's going to happen.
That's Vice News Tonight for Friday, November 17th.